Jehovah's Witnesses are told that their religion is not only true, but wholly unique. The only organization on earth that has the exact doctrines and practices of the religion. But Jehovah's Witnesses have a remarkable amount of things in common with another religion that was started in the late 1800s in upstate New York, the LDS Church, otherwise known as the Mormons. So here today, to help me talk about some of those similarities and differences, is I got so close to doing it all in one take. Post-Mormon activist and host of the Cults to Consciousness podcast, Shelise and Sola. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a conversation that there's a lot to say. There's a lot to say.
Yes. And we should say I was on your podcast as well, which is also a YouTube channel, and we're going to try and release these at the same time.
Yes.
So if you like what you're seeing here, you can click on over there. Hell, we'll have 2 tabs up. Have them going at the same time.
Why not?
It might be like that Wizard of Oz Pink Floyd thing where like if you watch them at the same time, like crazy stuff happens. I don't know. So this has been something that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. There's a fair amount of post-Mormon or ex-Mormon. Is there like a preference? Because I feel like I hear both. Not really.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, maybe it's the ex-Mormons feel more proud to be like ex, because they still have a vendetta with the church, and post-Mormons are like, oh, I used to be more, and they have more of a delicate view of their Mormon past.
Post-Mormon, yeah.
Yeah,
I like that,
I don't
actually.
know.
I like that there's more nuance in that community. Like, maybe we should start a post-JW thing for people who aren't like apostates. They're just like past it, post-JW.
Yeah.
You maybe you could give us just a little bit of your background. Were you born and raised in the religion? How'd you get to the point to, just kind of like from the time you're born to right now, just kind of everything leading up to this point in your life? Go.
All right, in 5 minutes or less. Well,
yes.
Interestingly enough, I also come from a very long line in the religion. So I know that you go back 4 generations. I don't know the exact number, although I'm pretty sure it's like the original like people that started the church. So fun fact, my great, I think 2nd grade or 3rd great grandma was the first woman to be baptized a Mormon in England.
Whoa, yeah, that's huge.
Yeah. So I have some like Mormon royalty. Also, one of my grandpas baptized a prophet who is a prophet or was a prophet. So there's another little like fun fact. Heber C. Kimball, I think. I don't know. I'm getting the names wrong. The point is, we come from a very long line of Mormons, and
Wow.
so it runs deep in the blood. And I was born and raised in Utah, which everyone would be like, of course, that makes sense. So it's interesting being raised in Mormon in Utah because it's just normal. So no one ever questions it. It's just like what you do. People don't really push the boundaries very often as far as, I don't know, kind of like not trying to identify that way. So the reason I bring this up is because when I was 16, I moved my senior year of high school to Portland, Oregon, and all of a sudden, Mormon was tattooed on my forehead, and I just wanted to wash that thing off, cover it with bangs, whatever I could do to not be Mormon, because now I wasn't cool anymore. I was like the weird kid, and I was a new kid for my senior year, so I was just like, how do I get rid of this while also proselytizing to everyone to become Mormon? So it was a really interesting transition because I was a very devout Mormon. I did all the right things as far as going to church on Sundays and reading my scriptures every night, to the point where if I didn't and I had a nightmare, I was like, God's punishing me. I should have read my scriptures more. And the only thing that I didn't really agree with was the modesty thing, because I was super into fashion and we're not allowed to show our shoulders or our thighs. It's like, it used to be you have to wear stuff to the knee, and then it slowly creeped up, and now it's kind of like just maybe like 8 inches above the knee is okay. And
wow.
the length of the sleeves has gone up, so it used to be like, I don't know, well below the shoulder, and now it's kind of like a cap sleeve like this for people who are watching is kind of okay.
This
So
will be
that was the
shocking
one
to many
thing.
witnesses watching. I feel like 8 inches above the knee is still far too short for a witness.
Interesting. Yeah, they're kind of changing with the times and pretending that it's always been that way. But in reality, garments used to be to your ankle and to your wrist, which is like what we jokingly called the magic underwear that if you don't know, you have to wear once you go through the temple. I never made it that far because I was too much of a sinner. We'll get to that. So I go to Portland and people are like, "Oh, you're from Utah. You must be Mormon." And at the time, I was really proud of it, except for the weird part. So I was like, "Yeah, I'm Mormon." And like, let me tell you about the church and like the gospel. They weren't having it, of course. Like, no one was interested. But on the other hand, I was still trying to fit in. So I'm like, "No, but I'm like a normal Mormon." And the funny thing is there were like different groups in our school where you could like the seniors went to this group of the hallway and the cheerleaders were
Mm.
here, and there was actually like a Mormon spot. They called it the Morpor, the Mormon porch. And I was like, "Guys, I'm not like them. I'm like with the cheerleaders." I was trying to be cool. So
Wow.
anyway, my best friend at the time comes up to me, and she actually had like a full-on intervention. We're in her car, so I couldn't go anywhere. And she was like, "I need to talk to you. I've been doing some research." She pulls out this notebook and it's full of like all the wrong things with the Mormon church. And looking back, she was totally right. But I was like, "What is this? This is ex-Mormon propaganda." And it's like, none of it's true. And I would know because I'm a Mormon, like all of the stuff that I was just terrified of, and stuff that I just didn't know were actually true because they don't teach you the real history when you are
Mm.
in the church. They teach you like a pretty 1950s like housewife version. Um, so anyway, I did a bunch of research that night, found out some really scary stuff that my mom corroborated, but I was like way too young to break the shelf. I was only 17, almost 18. And I'm like, I'm not going to deal with this right now. Like, I'm going to college. I'm going to do my thing. And also, this is kind of a funny story is you have to do bishop's interviews. And my bishop was like, "Oh, you're going to school to be a fashion designer. I'm so happy that you're doing that because now you can design modest clothing." And I was like, "Who said I'm gonna do that?" Like, I was not into it, but I was like, "Yeah, okay," just smile and nod. So I go to Vegas for school. There's actually a huge Mormon population out there because they
Hmm.
founded Vegas before the mafia came in and took over. And so I was like living my best life as a Mormon with all these other Mormon people that were pretty cool, like way cooler than the ones in Oregon. And it just came down to a bishop's interview that was so traumatic where I messed up with my boyfriend, still a virgin by the way, messed up.
Mm.
And he just made me feel like the scum of the earth. You're doing things that are unnatural and displeasing God, and you're not worthy, and you should break up with your boyfriend because you're a bad influence on him. I'm like, really? Because it was his idea. Anyway, I was so upset that I go home and I'm like, okay, this is my crossroads moment. What if none of it's true and I'm just feeling this way for nothing? And so I
Mm.
got back online. I was finally ready to dive into those, ex-Mormon websites that my best friend at the time was telling me about. So I Googled till the sun came up, like 6 hours straight on my computer. I found out all of these things about the church that no one ever told me, the problematic history, the mistranslations. And yeah, that was like the end of my road as a Mormon. And that was when I was 20. I'm 32 now. So it's been a while.
Oh, wow. Okay. Even as you were going through that, there were so many little things that you touched upon that seem very culturally similar. So before we get into that, I think the belief system, at least when I hear about it, it sounds different to what witnesses believe. How would you describe, maybe not the pitch that you would give, if you're going to someone's door, but how would you describe it, like to your friends? Like, what is Mormon religion like?
Yeah, and that's okay. I often have to explain it to people, especially when I meet them and they're like, "Oh, you're ex-Mormon? Tell me about it," because everyone's super fascinated, and I'm sure it's the same with you. They kind of look at us like a monkey with chimes, like, "Dance monkey, tell me everything," which is
Right.
fine. We started a podcast about it, so we're obviously open to it. So Mormonism. It was founded by Joseph Smith in upstate New York, and I think it was like 1832 that he had his first vision. And basically, he went to a grove of trees and he was like, God, I don't know which religion to join. None of them seem like the right one. What do I do? God and Jesus appeared to him and said, none of them are true. I'm going to give you the actual true church and the one that is the right one. And so he said, an angel is going to visit you and going to give you a new testament of God, and you're going to translate it. It's going to become the Book of Mormon, blah, blah, blah. So basically, that's how the Book of Mormon came to be, and that's where the word Mormon comes from. But really, the church's name is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which I find interesting because it's very parallel to the Jehovah's Witnesses. They believe they are the Latter-day Saints, like Christ is coming at any time, so we are the last ones that can save the world. So there's that. And then Joseph Smith came up with all these other rules and stuff. And what's interesting is he used to actually believe in the Trinity, and that was in the Book of Mormon because a lot of it was plagiarized from the Bible. But later realized actually we're not different from any other Christian and took it out and changed his first vision. Because originally it was like one person came down and said, I am God, whatever. And he has like 7 different versions of the first vision, and the church uses, I don't know, something in the middle. So it doesn't even make sense, the one that they picked. And also, none of the saints at the time knew about the first vision until like 8 years later. But now it's so fundamental to the doctrine, which I find hilarious. So basically, Mormons just believe that these Israelites came to the Americas. This is part of the Book of Mormon story. They came to the Americas. They settled. There was some sort of war disagreement. I don't know. God turned half of their skin black. Not half of one person. Half of the group turned their skin dark. And they called it like the curse, basically. And they believe that those people are the Native American people in America. So it's super racist, and
it's a very and it's very American centric, which Watchtowers as well.
Yeah, and also it goes right along with like the mound builder myth at the time, which was going around saying the Native American people aren't possibly smart enough to have built all of these monuments. It must have been somebody else. And Joseph Smith was like, I know who it was. Created this whole story. We know now from DNA and obvious like history that that's not the case. But now they're actually distancing themselves from that, which is a huge deal because Joseph Smith said the Book of Mormon is the most correct book.
Sorry, Christina kept on trying to like lean in and be like, I'm going to bed, and we just kept on like peekabooing each other. It was really funny.
That's okay. Yeah, so Joseph Smith says the Book of Mormon is the most correct book on the planet, although it's been changed and like shifted many times. So, and now they're saying, well, it's not a historical document, it's a spiritual one. But they don't tell their members that, but they write it in their website so they can't be sued. So they're very smart about that.
Now, what is I think one of the big like draws of the Mormon church is its, kind of like family values. The family unit is very like front and center. I mean, is that the central pitch? Because I think for witnesses, so much of trying to encourage people to join is the urgency of it, because God's kingdom is coming to earth. There's going to be this Armageddon event that's going to wipe out everything, wipe out all false religion. And there's a slight doomsday element to Mormonism, but that doesn't seem like that's necessarily front and center. Is that right?
It's not front and center, probably because it's not easy to sell.
Yeah.
Families Forever is the thing that's easy to sell. They go to people's door and they say, do you love your family? Well, yes. Well, do you want to be with them after you die? Well, yes. Then you need to be baptized or else you won't be. So it's still like a fear tactic, and they use it on people who are vulnerable, people who just love their families and don't like the idea of being separated from them. However, I think the funniest part about all of that is they say, well, our whole thing is families are forever, but they're the only religion that actively separates families after they die, because they say, well, for example, if my mom decides to leave the church, which she did, praise Jesus, if she leaves, that means I'm not going to see her in heaven, because it's like a chain, like a link. Salvation is like a linked chain. So then they say, yeah, if you leave, all of your kids are doomed. Or like it's that type of mentality where you look at most other Christian religions and they're like, yeah, you'll be with your family when you die. Like, why wouldn't you be? So
Yeah.
Mormons are the only ones that are actively separating families if they don't obey and do all of the things they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that's super nice. So it's like families forever unless, and if you change your mind. And then we'll
Families forever
see.
unless you drink coffee. Families forever unless you wear shorts and tank tops. Like, okay.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So that is one thing that you touched on modesty, and that's not necessarily what we're planning on starting. But I want to start there because that's a really interesting cultural thing, and kind of encompasses like an ingrained sexism and body shaming.
Mm.
So what was the effect on you growing up with that? Did that like instill like a sense of like shame or self-consciousness?
Yeah. And I did, in fact, did an entire episode on this about how sexual repression causes distortions and like mind control craziness. So, not to plug my channel, but if you want to watch that, you can.
Please do.
Basically, I was I was more of a rebel in that sense. So I would say that I pushed hard against that. I was one of the few that was like, yeah, you're not going to tell me that I can't wear shorts in Vegas. Sorry. Um,
Yeah, that's tough.
however, however, the shame comes in when you add in sexuality to that. Because like I mentioned, that's what got me to leave. Is I felt so much sexual shame for doing something very normal with a boyfriend of a year that I just felt like the scum of the earth. And so it plays together, of course, and that's the whole reason that they claim modesty is because you can't show your shoulders or you're going to tempt the men to do bad things, while
Right.
simultaneously saying to us, there's a prophet that said, women, how could you possibly think that your bony shoulders and knobby knees are attractive? Yeah, and so
So you
they're
had
telling
a
us
gay prophet probably, or an asexual
probably,
prophet or something.
probably.
It's
They're
like, I don't
telling
get it. I
us
don't.
your body is ugly, but also your body is way too sexy and men can't control themselves, which takes away the agency of men and makes them think that they don't have any control, which is very problematic as well, because then you go into issues of consent and issues
Yeah.
of, well, it's your fault that I raped you because you wore a skirt, and that's not okay. So my mentality was like, I was pushing against it. Just like I said, I'm not going to design modest clothing because that's not cute. But it did feed into the whole like, well, if I wear a shirt that's too low cut, he might try and do something. And I don't know if I'm going to stop him because I like, I don't know, I'm a sexual person.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, there were other repercussions other than just feeling shameful about my body.
Yeah. That all rings very true and familiar to me. You touched on something of a similarity, which is the Trinity thing. I didn't actually know this, but or maybe I did, but I forgot. But Mormons also don't believe in the Trinity.
Mm-mm.
Is that presented as something that's like incredibly like important and specific about you guys' belief? Like, were you aware that witnesses also don't teach the Trinity?
No. In fact, I thought Mormons were the only ones that didn't. And
Yeah.
so, at least the ones that claim to be Christian, which I think it's funny, they both are like, "No, we're Christian." And then Christians are like, "No, they're not."
Yeah.
I hear that all the time, especially in my comments.
Yeah.
They're like, "Mormons are not Christians and follow God and praise Jesus." I'm like, "Cool, that's
Oh
fine."
my god.
But
Every
anyway,
time I mention that witnesses are Christian, I get somebody being like, "Excuse me, no." I'm like,
yeah.
I don't care.
And the thing that I try and tell people is, look, I get that that's true to you, but that wasn't true to me growing up. Like there are
Exactly.
differences in opinion, there's nuance, there's so many different denominations that it's not just because it's false for you, it's false for everyone else. I'm sorry, that's just not how it works. So, yeah, as far as the Trinity goes, they make it very clear. And this is a big doctrinal thing that they recently took away, and everyone is up in arms. So, I don't know if you
Oh,
know this, but
probably not.
they say, and I'm gonna butcher the quote. Um, as man is, God once was, and as God is, man may become. I think that's how it goes. So basically, they're saying that Jesus and God are separate, and so is the Holy Ghost. And God used to be like us. He like came down onto a planet, was tried and tested, passed the test, and now he's a god. And
Whoa.
we can become gods. So I
That's
never
wild.
realized how blasphemous that is until later on, because that was my normal. I thought every Christian believed that way. So their whole pitch is like, guys, not only will you get to the highest level of heaven, there's levels of heaven, by the way.
It's not a pyramid scheme. It's not even a scheme per se.
Not only will you get to the highest level, but if you make it to the highest level of the highest level, you can be a god of your own planet. You can basically, women are destined to be continuously pregnant for time and all eternity, popping out spirit babies to populate this world that you will be a god of. And the other thing is, polygamy in heaven is very much part of the doctrine. So, the famous thing of, oh, Mormons are polygamous. Yes, they were, until the government was like, no, you're not. And they kept doing it in secret until finally they're like, you're going to lose your tax exempt status and BYU won't, blah, blah, blah. And so then they're like, okay, fine, we'll actually stop. But it's actually still part of the doctrine. And they still believe that you will practice polygamy in heaven, helping to repopulate the world that you build. So that's what they recently took away. They're like, we never said that you can get your own world. And everyone is like going off. Like, you've
Even
got
I
to be
know
kidding.
that. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
very shocking. I'm upset. I feel like you're losing out on a lot of incentive to be a Mormon if you don't get to be the god of
I
your own world.
I agree. Everyone's like, well, why did I go through all that pain if I couldn't be a god one day? And just the gaslighting is so real in Mormonism, where they change
Oh.
something and then pretend that it never was that way. And it just, I mean, this isn't something that's an old teaching. Like, it's been an active teaching since the beginning. They can't just take it away and pretend it never happened.
Oh man, this is all just so everything you're saying. I'm just like, yeah, we do that too. Yeah, that's okay. That's amazing. So what this reminds me of is the the way that witnesses portray paradise. Paradise that's going to be the new world. That is essentially the heavenly hope that all witnesses are looking forward to. Some are literally looking forward to heaven, but very few. Most people are looking forward to the earth. And when I was growing up, it was completely nebulous. It was just like paradise. Who knows what that's going to be like? This is might be free love and sex and parties all the time. Who knows? But what they've been doing increasingly is making it very clear that, like, well, no, in paradise, you might be assigned somewhere to live, and you might have like an assignment that you have to carry out because we're going to rebuild the earth after Armageddon. So you're probably, and there's still going to be like weekly meetings, and you're still going to be preaching because we're going to have to preach to all these dead people that are coming back to life. So it basically, when like you hear it now, it just sounds like, oh, so it's just going to be like this more still, like it's so much less appealing to me.
That's not paradise.
Like they started making those changes, when I was still in, but I still remember feeling like, oh, this feels like less fun than than in my head when I was younger, kind of taking away the specialness of it. But the thing that they also do is they will update and change doctrines, and then you just have to pretend that you never believed the previous thing. And you're supposed to somehow, the fact that they admit that the previous teaching was wrong is supposed to give you faith that the new teaching is right, which doesn't really make any sense. You know what I mean? Like the fact, like, why shouldn't it be equally likely that the new thing you're telling me is also untrue? But that never enters the conversation. Okay, so one thing I did want to get just some specifics on, just so we have a common basis of language, is like the church structure is a little different, and we have some similar words, but they might have different meanings. So like we have elders, but your elders seem different to me. We're built
Yeah.
different. Our elders are built different. What are the elders like? Like what is the church structure, I should say?
Well, everyone's an elder.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
like, so they have these levels that you go through as a young man. And now I can't remember all of them. Is like Melchizedek priesthood, Aaronic priesthood, and something else. So it starts when you're 12. So when you're 12, you have the priesthood, which is the power of God. So you can imagine what it
Damn.
does to the mentality of a 12-year-old that's like, I'm all powerful. And his mother will never get the priesthood because she's a woman. So it's like this weird power dynamic where the kid's like, well, I have the priesthood and you're supposed to do what I say. So there's that. And then I don't know at what point, I guess it would be when they become missionaries, or just when you're old enough to be in the family ward. And a ward, as crazy as it sounds, no, it's just like a group, a congregation. We never call it that though. It's a ward. So
Okay, so you
they
call a
just
congregation a
assign you.
ward.
Yeah, it's like depending on where you live, they assign you a ward. So if you're in a certain radius, you go to that church at that specific time. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Like you can't just pop around.
Yep, that's
Like
how it is
that's
here.
yeah, so that's your ward. And then a couple wards put together in the same area are called a stake. And then
Okay.
other than that,
Circuit.
so that's basically it. And then as far as the elders go, when you're old enough to be in the family ward, which means when you're 18 to 30 and single, you are forced to go to a singles ward because they want to pair you up and they want to get you
Right.
married to the right person. So if you're it was such a sad thing. I remember in Vegas, I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's so sad. They're like 26 and they're still in this ward." Like it was a
I
big
know.
deal if you
I was
were
one of those
that
people.
age. Yeah, and then when they turned 30, it was this big sad thing like, "Oh my gosh, they're not married yet and they have to go to the family ward. That's so embarrassing." So basically like yeah, if you get married and you get to go to the family ward, or if you're too old, they kick you out, then you're an elder. Like they just call you Elder Brooks or Elder Christopherson or whatever it is.
Gotcha.
It's just like a respect thing, or they
Mm,
call him brother and
right.
sister.
So the leaders of like a local ward then would be what? Like who's going to yell at you if you do something
Yeah.
wrong, other than everyone all the time?
So that's called the bishopric. So the
Bishop. Okay.
bishopric is the bishop, I think first and second counselor, and then maybe one other person. So there's like 4 people that are at the top of a ward, and those are just randomly called, like called of God. So they can be your local plumber, your dentist,
Oh
your
yeah.
dude that doesn't even have a profession. They just call these guys into these positions who are not qualified, and they run the church.
Yeah.
So, and
That's
it's
how
all
our
volunteer
elders
too.
are.
So do they
Yeah.
pay your elders or is it just volunteer?
No, it's all voluntary.
Yeah.
Voluntary, I should say. Yeah. Yeah, it's all voluntary. And we as XJW say the same thing, where it's like, it is plumbers and electricians and, window washers who are, giving you vital information on your life or shaming you for making out with your boyfriend or
Yeah.
whatever. Like when you look back on it, you're like, these were just some random dudes that were dictating my life. Yeah, it's kind of weird. Not to like shame plumbers or window washers. It's just kind of, when you think of people like in
No.
positions of authority, it's just like, this is just like some guy.
Mhm. Yeah, and the biggest issue that's been coming up a lot lately is the abuse factor because
Yeah.
I don't know if they do this in Jehovah's Witnesses, but you have to, from the age of 12, you have to do bishop interviews and tell the bishop if you've sinned sexually. So, like, you have to tell them if you're masturbating, if you watched porn, if you let someone
Yeah.
touch you. And sometimes these bishops go way too far and they ask for details. And
Oh
there's been
yeah.
so many scenarios where these bishops, like, end up get sent to jail because someone finally said something and then they realize they've been abusing all of the children in the ward. And so they've been pushing. There was one bishop that said, "Hey, I don't want to do this anymore." And he came up to the church and was like, "Can we please just change this policy?" They excommunicated him and then changed the policy to where a parent can be in the room, which I'm like, that feels worse. Like, I don't want to talk about
It does
giving
feel
my
worse.
boyfriend a blowjob with my mom in the room. Like, hard pass. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. That does seem way worse. Like I'm trying to think of like when I got in trouble with my girlfriend. I think it would have been a lot worse if like my dad was there. Yeah, I think that would have been
Yeah.
very strange. But yeah, very similar. And like they famously ask very lascivious, creepy questions, ask for way more personal details. And that's another weird thing too. That's like that's not in writing anywhere. So that's just like purely a strange cultural thing that's passed through. It's just like and it might be young teenage girls who are being sequestered by these, old
Mm-hmm.
guys, asking them these intimate sexual details about maybe
Yeah.
even like their own sexual assault or something. It's very
Yeah. And
creepy and disturbing.
that happens where they actually, I've heard stories of them, women going in saying, I was raped, and then the bishop saying, well, what did you do wrong? Or like, what were you
Yeah.
wearing? And blaming the victim. And so there are just so
Hmm.
many layers of abuse and trauma happening within these bishops' interviews that are just not okay.
This is the kind of thing that, to me, is a good like demarcation of like this is not true. That there's a commonality between these harmful groups, and it kind of doesn't matter what the doctrines are. Actually, I heard this from a former Mormon, that you realize that everything that is good about the church is not unique, and everything unique about the church is not true. And
I love that.
that's like been a mantra that I've repeated since I heard that, because it's kind of true. Like everything that makes witnesses like completely unique is like, we'll die if we need a blood transfusion, or we shun our kids or something like that. But everything that is true about it is, you can find anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely second that because a lot of Mormons and I myself, like I didn't realize the traumas that I was facing and the issues that I had mentally until I left. And so
Mm,
when I look back at my childhood, I'm like, well, no, it didn't seem like overt abuse. Like I seemed like I had a happy, healthy childhood and everything was fine. But once you leave it and you start deconstructing, you realize, oh, that's really harmful. Oh, that affected me. Oh, that's why I'm this way. And you realize the damage that it's done.
yeah. We were talking on your podcast, what like I've realized so many of my annoying like traits of just like constantly needing validation, or constantly checking, like constantly worrying that I have in some way like upset somebody or done something wrong, is coming from this place of like, oh yeah, because literally everything I did was being watched by God, and every little mistake I made might have brought reproach upon him. So that's still manifesting itself in some way. But you
Mm-hmm.
are, of course, that's painted as a positive thing. I mean, of course you should be thinking about your every action potentially offending somebody else or bringing reproach upon God. And maybe I could ask you about that, because one of the big things that kind of defines your daily life as a witness is not just what you are doing, but how what you are doing will look to other people, and whether it might upset them or offend them or disrupt the unity of the congregation. Is there a parallel to that in the Mormon Church as well?
Absolutely. Public perception is one of the most important things, which is why you see a lot of toxic positivity. And I talked about it in length with my mom's episode, where she paints the scene where she's trying to get the kids ready for church. And I think it's the same with you guys. You can't just go in whatever you want. Like for women, you have to be in a dress. In fact, someone
Yeah.
tried to wear pants and cause this whole movement, and everyone was just appalled that women would even consider going to church in pants,
Oh yeah,
even
no
if it's
way.
like a nice pantsuit. So women have to wear skirts. Even the kids, like the little girls, have to be in
Hmm.
skirts. The little boys have to be in little slacks and button ups,
Yep,
and
little
men
baby
have
suits.
and men have to wear a white button-up shirt and a tie. And so it's a whole thing trying to get the family ready, especially when you have a lot of kids. So she explains how you're running through the house and I gotta get the kids ready, put your shoes on, da 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 da, trying to get breakfast, trying to get food in the crock pot so that it's ready when you get home because church is not 1 hour or 2 hours, it's 3 hours long. And you have to get everything ready, and then you get to church and it's like, hi, how you doing? Oh, everything's great,
Yes.
it's so good to see you. And you just have to pretend that you're the super parent and
Yeah.
super religious person who's checking all of the boxes and doing all the right things. And to that point as well, so it extends past church. They say when you go out into the world, you're representing the church, and you always have to be on your best behavior, because if someone sees you and watches you and says they're Mormon but they drink alcohol, or they're Mormon but they drink coffee, you're giving everyone a bad look, because
Yeah.
now they're associating you with a church that doesn't really follow the rules. And that was especially true when I moved to Portland. And it was like, you have to be an example because there's not very many of us. And in order for people to want to join, you have to show them what Mormonism is really about. And that's where I was really towing the line and being like, yeah, I'm Mormon, but I wear shorts. I'm a cool Mormon.
I know, you rebel in the little ways that you can. I would do that at school. I was like, I curse, I'll say cuss words. I'm a
Uh-huh.
cool witness. Like, meanwhile, I don't go to any parties. I don't do anything fun ever. Clearly not cool by any metric. Toxic positivity is a great phrase. I don't think is anything I've ever talked about. Can you describe that? Because
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
feels like a very true thing, but I don't think I could articulate it.
Yeah, toxic positivity is when even if your world is crumbling and falling apart, you put on a smile and you say, "No, everything's fine. I'm fine. Everything will be great." Or a perfect example, and I'm sorry it's a little dark, but this happens, so I think it's important to speak on it.
Yeah.
If a parent loses a child, they're supposed to go to church or go about their life saying, "Well, you know what? God called them home and it's
Mm,
God's way and it's okay that they died because that's what God wanted and I'm fine." And it's so damaging because they're not allowed to grieve. It's just
yeah.
that's what the toxic positivity is, and it also comes from all ends. So I've heard stories where people lose a child, and then someone from the church comes up to them and is just like, "Well, you know what? God works in mysterious ways," or God must have wanted them home. And no, like they don't feel validated in their feelings and they don't feel like they're allowed to have negative feelings. Like it's okay to scream and be angry and get it
Yeah.
out and say, no, this shouldn't have happened, especially when it was something that wasn't like an accident, for example, or if their kid is kidnapped and they're just supposed to be like, well, that's what God wants. No, that's not okay.
Well, what? That's really interesting because witnesses would eat up hearing something like that. Be like, see this false hope that other churches give. We would never say something like that God called them home. We would never do that. But they do the same thing in practice where anybody who dies, you think, well, they're gone for now, but the end is going to be here soon. We will be reunited in paradise. And so we
Mm.
don't really mourn them. It's kind of like they're not really gone. And so you still kind of have that process of halting the grieving process in place somewhere along the line because you are living in expectation of seeing that person again. And
Mhm.
so even though witnesses like to say like, oh no, we don't say this kind of crazy stuff like God needed another angel, in practice it's still harmful to the natural grieving process.
I'm so glad that you brought that up because that's something I totally missed. Yay, I forgot about something in Mormonism.
Hey.
Um, hey, um, it's the whole life after death thing, like the plan
Mm.
of salvation, and that's their big thing. And they also use that against people. So back to the whole knocking on your door. You love your family, right? Oh, you had a child that died. Well, if you want to see your child again, you need to be baptized into our
Ah,
church. And the reason
there you
and how
go.
they keep you there, and this is especially true, I've seen it over and over on my social media, and it breaks my heart. These mothers who've had miscarriages or stillbirths or lost a baby that way, they say, well, if you want to see that child again, if you want to raise your child in heaven, they say that if you get to heaven, you can raise the child that you lost if you're faithful, if you're worthy, if you follow all the rules. So they put these expectations on these women who are grieving, and it just puts all of this pressure on this mother to not only try and get on with their life having lost a child, but now they have to still be perfect. Toxic perfectionism, because if they're not perfect, their child will not grow up in heaven with them. And that's how they keep people in because they're afraid, like, well, I don't really believe the doctrine, but what if it's true and I leave and I'll never see my child again?
Mm. Yeah, see that my mom would say that she thought because she had a miscarriage before she had me, and she would still tell me, and she still believes that she'll just wake up one day in paradise and she'll just be pregnant and she'll have that baby that she miscarried
Wow.
now in this in Satan's system of things. So yeah, that's still all very there, and yeah, that fear of keeping people in, like, well, if you've lost somebody, if you want to see them again, you know, you have to stay in, which is not cool, not cool.
No.
IMO.
No.
I condemn it in the strongest possible terms. Not cool. So let's talk about proselytizing, which is different
Yes.
because there is a bit of door-to-door work for the Mormons. I mean,
Mhm.
that's kind of the thing that would happen is people would either, you know, they would think that we're Mormons before they realize that we're witnesses, or I'm sure it happened to you too. But it's more of like a limited time period that you have to do it. So how does that work for you guys?
So it's actually a set aside time where you dedicate your life, morning, noon, and night, to doing that for a 2-year period. So it's not like you have to do it every day. In fact, you can't even if you wanted to. So that's when I was mentioning that these teenage boys become elders, and that's why it says like Elder Christofferson on their name tag. So it used to be that you couldn't go until you were 19 for a man and 21 for a woman. And the reason being is they wanted women to, they're like, if we push off the date, maybe they'll get married sooner. So they would rather a
Wow.
woman get married and start her family before 21 than go on a mission to convert people. Yeah, so they
Bizarre.
recently changed it. I don't know how long ago, maybe 5 years ago or so, where now the age for boys, and I say boys because they're still boys, is 18 and the age for women is 20, I think. So they shortened it because they realized that these boys were going to college for a year. That's what they would do. They would send them to college knowing that it doesn't matter what I do in college because I'm going to go on a mission, and they would mess up.
Yeah.
And so they weren't worthy to go on a mission, and so then they wouldn't go at all. So they're like, if we get them right out of high school, then
Yeah.
chances are we can ship them off and they'll be fine. But yeah, so you have to be worthy to go on a mission. And so no masturbating, no porn, no sex, no anything sexual of any kind. And then, you just have to be in good standing with the church, like pay your tithing and all that. So you go as a young man for 2 years. Women only go for a year and a half. I don't know why they did it that way. Probably because they wanted to get home and get married and have kids.
Right.
Um, and it is really intense for these missionaries. Are you familiar with all the rules they have to follow?
Yeah, you kind of constantly have to. There's like a buddy system. It's pretty strict, right? You got to really stick with your
Yes.
buddy.
But it's not even that. Like, even when you get home, you're not supposed to be out of each other's sight because
Oh,
they
I
don't
didn't
want
realize
you to
that.
sneak off into your room and masturbate. So the whole joke is you would have to do it in the shower because that's the only place that your companion is
Right.
not with you. So, yeah, I also recently learned that you have to sleep in the same room, but not in the same bed. Like, they had to put that in the rules. Yeah, so there's that. You're not allowed to swim because Satan rules the waters, which
Now,
is
how did that
funny.
happen? Because I
No
thought that
idea.
God gave us dominion over all of the fish of the sea and the land mammals.
Yeah, I don't really know where that rule comes from, but it's a well-known rule that you can't swim, especially on Sundays, because Satan rules the waters. And I'm like, so what about baptism? Like, this makes no sense.
Satan
Um,
rules. Oh, yeah, that's a big conflict. Get
yeah,
baptized in that
so
Satan liquid.
yeah. So you can't do that. You're not allowed to hug someone of the opposite sex. You can only do handshakes.
Oh,
And you have to get up every morning at I think it was 6 a.m. to do an hour or two of scripture study. And then you go out knocking on doors or teaching lessons or doing service projects. You maybe get dinner from a member who wants to treat you. Otherwise, you have to cook yourself. But like the allowance is so low that they barely have any money to eat unless their family sends them money. And oh, on that note, it used to be that you weren't even allowed to call your family when you were on a mission.
oh
You
my.
could only write them letters, like physical handwritten letters, and you could call once on Mother's Day and once on Christmas Eve. So people would like gather around like, "Oh, our brother's going to call in 20 minutes." It was like a whole thing just to talk to your son who has been away from home for that long. So now I think you can email them and it's a little bit less strict, and I think you can call more often, but it used to be really intense. So it was a big deal if you were dating a returned missionary, and this was very common. You were high school sweethearts, you would send him off on a mission and say, I'm going to wait for you. And you would write letters. And then the
Yeah.
joke was you would get Dear John, which if you've seen the Book of Mormon musical, it's like, Dear John, she
Yeah.
broke up with you and married another returned missionary before you came back. So yeah, really, really intense mission rules. And so it's only a limited period of time. You dedicate every single minute of every day to the mission. And then when you come home, you're relieved of your proselytizing services.
Wow. So that's interesting because it sounds like how missionary work functions for Jehovah's Witnesses. Maybe not to the degree where you have to, have constant eyes on the other person to make sure they're not masturbating, but the like very strict regimented schedule and like getting a small stipend that you can't really reasonably live off of and all that stuff. Like that kind of stuff is kind of how it works for people who go to the witness missionary schools and are in this really intensive like scripture study training environment, and then they're sent into this harsh territory to dedicate however many over 100 hours a month to preaching. So that's kind of interesting. What is the like scriptural, if any, rationale for like we do this for this certain period of time and then it's over? Like, is there like some kind of internal rationale, or is it just kind of tradition at this point?
I feel like they just picked a certain time. And they're like,
Yeah.
2 years sounds good, year and a half for the
Yeah.
women. But also they do have they call it a missionary training center, the MTC, where every missionary has to go before they're sent on their mission. And as you know, they're sent worldwide. So they go
Yeah.
to the MTC for 6 weeks longer if they're learning a foreign language, and then they boot them out and they're just like expected to know the language and preach the word.
So we had MTS, Ministerial Training School, but they changed the
Oh.
name. And now I'm wondering if they did it to avoid the similarity, because now it's called the School for Kingdom Evangelizers, SKE.
Oh.
So that all those like arbitrary rules, it kind of reminds. I mean, it reminds me of our own environment and among the Jehovah's Witnesses. It makes it sound like I'm living among apes. It made me think of my experience growing up, because like on one hand we teach like everything we do is based on the Bible, but at the same time it's like we have a thing called a pioneer, and in order to be a pioneer you have to preach for 70 hours a month. And now where does any of that come from? Completely made up. It doesn't have any basis in the Bible at all. It's just kind of like a thing to do. So it feels like this kind of like arbitrary made up rules couched in scripture. I don't know. I don't like it.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of ask about the culture of like sexual repression that you talked about, and I know that the rules around dating are also very strict for Mormons. Soaking, we don't know what soaking.
Yeah, soaking.
If you don't enjoy a nice Google or a terrible Google, I don't know. But like, how does that affect you? Like, how does that affect the life of somebody who's a Mormon?
Yeah, it just creates a lot of mental gymnastics. So, soaking, are we allowed to say what it is?
Oh yeah, go for it.
So, let me lay it out for you folks. Soaking is a Mormon loophole. Now, it's not exclusively something that like if you're Mormon, you do this. It's for the people who really push the boundaries to make it make sense for them because they're super horny and they don't want to break the rules and have sex because sex is a sin next to murder, but they want to have some sort of sex life. So what they do is the man enters the woman but doesn't thrust. He just leaves it there.
Yeah.
And so
Almost like an accident happened. Like, oh no, it's just there. How did that happen?
How did that get in there? I guess we'll just leave it for a second. And
Right.
so, I mean, it's not like they're soaking for 30 minutes. It's like a minute long process, and the guy pulls out and probably comes immediately because he's horny. So that's soaking, and that's something that results as a distortion of forcing yourself to not do anything sexual, especially when you're not even allowed to masturbate, which we know is a very human thing and it's a very healthy thing for people to do. So when you're so repressed and you're so bottled up, it just causes you to bend the rules in such a ridiculous way that is going to eventually affect your sex life when you're finally able to have sex.
Yeah.
So Yeah, and oh man, there's so much to say about this topic. So I'm just gonna like give you the Cliff Notes version.
Right.
When when you're repressed for so long and then you finally get married and then they say multiply and replenish the earth, you have such shame around your sexuality, around your body that you were told is simultaneously ugly and simultaneously too attractive to even be able to open up physically and mentally for
Yeah.
a good sex life. So it's really hard for people to flip the switch. And sometimes it takes years of marriage before they're even comfortable with having sex. And it's unfortunate because, especially in the case of women, if you're not aroused, sex is painful. And sometimes
Yeah.
they don't even know that it can be different because they don't even know how to get aroused because they're not allowed to explore themselves before having sex. And they're told that basically, in a roundabout way, your sexual pleasure is only okay if your spouse is in the room, which
Mhm.
makes you completely distance yourself from your own sexuality, from like getting in tune with who you are, what you enjoy, and your own intuition around things. You just think, well, if my husband's not in the room, I can't touch myself. And even then, like, is it okay? I don't know. What are the rules?
Right.
And in the 80s, it was actually a rule that you couldn't have oral sex even if you were married. And I found
Yeah.
that out later because I was telling someone my story and they were like, "Oh, the reason your bishop said that is because it was totally a rule." And I was like, "What? I didn't even know that." But they got
It's
rid of
still
it
kind of
because
an
they
unofficial rule for witnesses.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
because they realized that married couples were like, "Nah, we're gonna do it still. Like, I don't care what you say." And so they took it
Yeah.
away and pretend it never happened. But it's stuff like that that causes people to, like I said, be completely out of touch with their own sexuality, to be completely disconnected from their partner because they don't enjoy sex or they don't even know how to do it. And also, if you're not with a partner, there's cases of people that turn into sexual predators because it
Mhm.
comes out in weird ways. And so, I mean, lucky for me and unlucky for me, I lost my virginity in like a not a great way, but I'm glad that I didn't wait till marriage because I was still planning on it even after I left Mormonism. I was like, "No, I'm 21, I've waited this long, I'm gonna do it." You know, I set out to do something, I wanted to do it. I'm glad that that didn't happen because I think it's incredibly important to to be able to explore your sexuality before you commit to somebody. But so I can't say that I have so much of the sexual repression issues that a lot of people have. However, it's still there. It's still in the back of your head when you start to think like, "Oh, if I," so I'm engaged now, but if I was dating, back when I was dating, I would think, "Well, if I have multiple sexual partners, does that make me a whore? Does that make me a bad
Mm.
person? Does that diminish me?" Because famously, Mormons have this lesson that they teach young women from ages 12 to when you graduate high school. It's the licked cupcake analogy, where they literally bring in they do object lessons, and you'll
Mhm.
hear of multiple different ones. One of them is they bring in a thing of cupcakes and like, "Who wants a cupcake? Me, I want a cupcake." And then the teacher takes one and licks it and says, "Now who wants it?" And everyone's like, "I don't want it." Well, this is symbolic of your sexual purity. And once that cupcake is licked, it can't be unlicked, and no one's gonna want to eat a licked cupcake. So you can imagine what that does to the psyche of someone who maybe they messed up, maybe they're a convert, maybe they were sexually assaulted, and
Yeah.
it creates this mentality that you are damaged goods if you have sex before marriage. And I could go on with this for days because it's so aggravating.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely horrific and very similar. Do you think there's a whole subset of like Mormons and ex-Mormons that have like cupcake fetishes now, like with weird repressed cupcake like
You know
images
what's
and stuff?
funny? Not I've been thinking, like, I think soaking could be a fetish now because, like,
Oh, for sure.
let's see if we can put it in and not move it. Like, maybe that's a fetish. I don't know. It could be.
Maybe. Let's find out. I'm gonna go to the
Let's
screen here. We're
find
just gonna
out.
no. Yeah, same culture, and, I got married late in life, in my late 20s, and so
Yeah.
I had that same issue, and I had issues, like, performing, like, being in my own head, and I didn't really realize until I started to deconstruct everything, Well, like the reason why I had those issues at first is because I had my entire life been told not to think about myself that way, or
Yeah.
just to try and repress all that stuff, and to immediately try and flip a switch and be like, okay, now you're a sexual being. It's difficult to do, even if
Yes.
even if you obviously think about it a lot and you're constantly repressing these desires. Suddenly, when you're like given the okay, it's like, oh, I trained my body not to do that. Yeah,
Right.
it's almost like it's bad
Yeah.
for your body and your brain.
Oh, you know what? There was a higher up that said masturbating would make you gay.
Yeah, they used to teach that in the witnesses too. They used
Really?
to,
Oh my
yeah.
God.
There's some old books that link masturbation to homosexuality. They did used to say
Mhm.
thing like they used to perpetuate the rumors of like that's what makes like I don't know, makes your hands hairy or something weird, like
What?
all kinds of weird stuff. Yeah, yeah. And it's still not allowed. I mean, it's still a thing that you are supposed to talk to the elders about if you have issues with. And how creepy. I think one of the
Mhm.
things I feel looking back is like how wildly inappropriate that I was expected to talk to strange men about, my private habits.
Yes.
How weird. How creepy. But this is
Yes.
just normalize the matter of like being stuck and keeping people in. One thing that we've talked about a few times is like the way doctrines change. And you mentioned your friend who I wish I had a friend like this who was interested enough in my religion to do research into it for me. That's great. Finding out about the actual history of the church versus what you're taught. How does the Mormon church do that? I mean, like, are there like official church histories that like you're kind of given that you read? Because that's kind of how it is for witnesses. We have a couple history books that are just written to whitewash out all the bad stuff.
Yeah, it's similar to you guys where you're not allowed to read. It's like search, ponder, and pray, but within our resources. You can't look elsewhere. So that's a huge way they keep people in, is because they only read what they want them to read. And then they demonize everything that's written by someone who's not Mormon if it conflicts, if it makes them look bad.
Mm,
So I even remember one time in church, they were talking about getting your own planet in the afterlife, right? And I was like, oh, yeah, my mom told me that in heaven the flowers sing. And they're like, well, how did she know that? And I said, well, she read this book about this guy who died, had a near death experience, and he came back and he told everyone what heaven looked like. And they said, well, who
oh
wrote it? Who wrote it? And I was like, oh, I'm not sure. And they're like, well, if he's not Mormon, I wouldn't trust that source.
yeah.
And then it caused me to question my mom, which eventually I was like, no, I bet flowers sing in heaven. But still, they put you in this bubble where you can't look outside. But the thing is, Mormons are famous for keeping extensive records on everything.
Yeah.
And they have an incredible history of the church written down, and you can find it if you look hard enough.
Mm,
So some of it's on the church website, but it's buried so deep to where it's really difficult to find it. And they do it on purpose, but they have it there so that if anyone asks any questions, they're like, oh no, we disclose everything. It's on the website.
yeah.
So now, recently, I want to say in the past couple years, they have on the website. It's called the Gospel Topic Essays, where they answer all of the questions that are problematic that members are asking, and they answer some of them honestly. So, for example, how did Joseph Smith translate the Book of Mormon? And they finally admitted, yeah, he put his head into a hat and looked at a rock that lit up like an iPhone. And this is stuff that we were not taught. So when we were
Wow.
taught, it was they would show us pictures and like I don't know, just like paintings depicting Joseph Smith translating the Book of Mormon, and you see the gold plates on the table, you see him like looking at them and he's writing. But that is not how it happened at all. And they knew that, but they purposely gave us this idea of this is how it worked because they knew that putting your head in a hat and looking at a rock is actually bananas, and no one would believe that.
This is what's so like hard for me to wrap my mind around, because I'm sure like you get this question too of like, do the leaders know that it's a cult or whatever? And like, I made a video about this, and I think like for our church leaders, I think the answer is like yes and no. Like they know that they are considered a cult by every definition of the word, which is why they changed the definition on their website for their frequently asked questions articles. But at the same
Mhm.
time, I still think they really think it's true. But where I have a hard time reconciling that stuff is when you know that they have rewritten history. And I mean, I don't know, like how do you think they justify that in their minds? Like, are they like, we can't let the flock know this because it would stumble them? Or do you
Yeah.
think that they're like, well, maybe it was more like, I don't know. I'm genuinely just asking what your opinion is.
So, yeah, we talk about this all the time, and I think the bottom line is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which by the way, they don't like to be called Mormons anymore. And this all
I
ties into it.
know.
Oh my gosh, this is great. So, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a huge multi-billion dollar business. They
Yeah.
have at least over $300 billion and assets. That is
God damn.
enormous. To give you some context, because I listened to an episode with John Dehlin and Mike Rinder from Scientology.
Yeah.
Scientologists have about 1 billion,
I was
and
about to
Mormon
say,
Church
yeah.
has 300 billion. So this it's a corporation. So they haven't figured out their marketing tactics. They haven't figured out how to keep people in and how to keep people paying, because it is a requirement to pay 10% of your income, or else you're not in good standing with the church. And they, even at the end of the year, if the bishop knows that you haven't been paying your tithing, he will call you in for a settlement interview where you have to pay, or they'll take away your temple recommend. So it's literally a pay to play, but very sneakily, where they're like, we're not like Scientologists, we don't make people pay to get to heaven. Yeah, you do though.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the Mormon thing, it's funny because everyone's like, oh, we're not allowed to call them Mormons anymore. Why? And we know from a high source that it was because when people Google Mormon, a lot of the truth comes up, and they didn't like that because it was
Yeah.
hurting their numbers and conversions. So now they say that it's a victory for Satan if you call them Mormon, even though, like,
Oh,
just a few years ago, they had $1 billion or $1 million campaign called I Am Mormon that the
yeah, I
prophet
remember that.
created. So they're going against it because they know that they're losing money, and people are dropping out because they're just simply Googling Mormon and they're not converting. So
Yeah.
so to answer your question in a huge long-winded way, I think the top leaders of the church absolutely know that it's BS. They know that they're
Mm,
lying to people, but why would they defect when they're making a huge salary? They get private
right.
jets, they get homes, their grandchildren get free school, not just like their children, their grandchildren get to go to school for free. There are
Wow.
so many perks, not to mention the power trip you get when you're an apostle. So, why on
Yeah.
earth would they be willing to come out and say, yeah, it's not true, and lose their entire family and all of the perks?
This is one of the things that's such a great explanation, by the way. And it kind of does highlight one of the big differences, and one of the things that the organization of Watchtower and Jehovah's Witnesses really likes to hang their hat on, is that they are not a greedy organization. And I think that's one of the things that, when I would express that I was concerned it was a cult or whatever, it's like, well, cults are all about money. These Scientologists, the Mormons, you got to tithe a certain amount. But when you look at internal documents that like the elders are sent, like you are supposed to pledge a certain amount per month as a witness. Like they every year they're supposed to do a little thing. It's recommended every publisher is supposed to pay this amount per month. That is taken as a given that amount is supposed to be sent to the branch every month. And so it is, and they put out all these videos and broadcasts with the importance of giving of your material things. So it's not like they're tithing a certain percentage of your income, but there's still the rhetoric of like, you are supposed to give money to the organization. And if you don't, that, reflects negatively on your relationship with Jehovah. And if you're not, if you're not praising Jehovah with your valuable things, then you're not giving him everything. So, I mean, the money is still very much there, but Yeah, I don't think Witnesses are a $300 billion organization. Maybe they got like 2 billion laying around. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's a difference we mentioned on the episode we just did on my podcast, that they like to keep Jehovah's Witnesses poor so that they're kind of
Yeah.
in ignorance. The opposite is true for Mormons. So they put heavy pressure on like getting the best jobs, making the most money, and it makes sense because it's not a set of fixed amount that you tithe, it's 10% of your income. So the
Yeah.
richer you are, the more money you're giving to the church, and they want that. In fact, they go to poor countries and they tell them the reason that you're poor is because you're not tithing to God. So even if, and they say, if it comes down to a choice between feeding your family and tithing, you have to tithe because God will bless you. So people are literally going hungry. They're like, oh my gosh, there was this heartbreaking story of this woman who she couldn't fix her like a hole in her roof because she had to give tithing, and the bishop said, you have to pay tithing and you'll be blessed." It was so cold that one of her children died because of it.
No.
Yes, yes. So it is detrimental. It is fatal to some families, and they stand behind, you have to pay us, even though they could literally feed the world 5 times over with the amount of money that they
Oh,
have.
yeah. Good Lord. Oh, it's just horrific. I don't want to keep you all night, but
It's
what
okay. I
my
could talk all night about this.
no, oh my God, me too, right? Okay, so one maybe to close this out, and I don't even know if you had an impression of Witnesses, but what was your impression of Jehovah's Witnesses when you were a Mormon? Because I'm sure you were aware of them, because people would get you confused with that sometimes, I'm sure. Or like to the extent that you thought about us at all, what was your impression?
Mhm. To be honest, we were so sheltered from other religions that
Yeah.
in Utah, I mean, the religious diversity is basically zero. So I think I only knew one other person that wasn't Mormon and they were Buddhist. And I was like, whoa, that's so crazy. Like, we definitely need
Yeah.
to bring them to God. But I didn't have an awareness of Jehovah's Witnesses probably until high school. And I think the only reason I knew is because I was like, oh, they're the other people that go door knocking, except we're the ones that have the truth. And then even past that, it took a long time. And I'm still like, let me pick up a book and read about these religions because I am so blinded to all of the other religions. They would
Yeah.
tell us if we were to go to another church and we thought we felt the spirit, it actually wasn't. Like, you can't even, those people aren't
Mm,
feeling the spirit because it's not the right church. So why go? It's just a false sense of hope.
yeah.
So they they really told us not to even research, not to dabble, not to look into any of it, which is unfortunate, and it bleeds into so many other parts of my life where I'm so sheltered from pop culture. My poor fiance is like, "You don't know this band?" I'm like, "No." I don't know. Like, I don't know that movie. I've never seen The Godfather because I wasn't allowed to watch it. Like, there's so many things that I was just completely sheltered from that I'm still, as a 32-year-old, trying to learn how the world works.
Right. We were like
So
in a cryogenic chamber for like the vast majority of our
yeah,
lives. Yeah.
it's so bad. And so, yeah, as far as what I knew about Jehovah's Witnesses, not much. I think I've probably learned the most about them in the past couple years. I have a friend now who is an Jehovah's Witness, and she was
It's
telling me some of the things, and I was like, "Oh, you guys, we were like the same."
yeah. That's so interesting because it was total same for me. Like it was just like, yeah, why are they knocking on doors? They don't have the truth. What are they even talking
Yeah,
about? Why are they
yeah.
doing that? That seems weird.
Just
You
wasted their
know?
time.
Yeah. Like why bother? I mean, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't have the truth. Yeah, you just don't
Yeah.
even, and like you also just don't have time. You don't have time to think about it, and like
Mhm.
yeah, you're just so busy. Well, Shelise, this has been fantastic. It's been a great conversation. Where can people find you on the internet?
Yes. So you can find me at Cults to Consciousness, and on Instagram, Cults to Consciousness, and TikTok, same thing. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Very nice. Yes, please do like and subscribe and give the iTunes. Should they go to iTunes? Give a 5-star rating, maybe?
I mean, sure, why not?
Why not? Or maybe like 3 or 2 or something if they don't like it very much. No, they should probably.
I
No, they should
mean,
give it 5. They should give it 5.
don't do it unless you want to give me. No, I'm just kidding. But please, like, listen, give your honest review. I wouldn't ask for you to fake anything. I would love it if you would listen and tell me what you really think.
I'm totally kidding. I just
know,
thought I
I
would totally
know.
botch it at the end. Like, or I mean, if they don't like it, they just give it 2 stars. I've never seen anybody give 2 stars to a podcast. It is either 1 or 5. And this
Yes. Well,
this podcast is a 5. I gotta say.
I
And I'm not
thank
just
you.
saying that because I
appreciate
was on an episode.
that.
No, it really is
Yeah,
great.
I'm doing my best.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining. I think that you should. I think it'd be really fun to have you come on sometime and react to some of the like propaganda at some point, like on a stream
I
or
would love
something,
to.
just for
I
fun.
would be honored, and I'll bring some of my Mormon stuff. There's so much of it because, like you, we have monthly publications. They have their own magazine. They have
Yes, we
like
were gonna get
all
into
their
this
own.
too.
My goodness, there's so much stuff. So there's a lot to choose from.
We'll follow up. We'll follow up on this. We'll check in. Do a follow up conversation. Talk about all the propaganda and literature and stuff. All right.
Amazing.
Well, like and subscribe to the channel and do all the things. Thanks so much, Shelise.
All the things. Thank
All
you.
right. Bye.